All right, it's looking like numbers are slowing. So hello and welcome to the latest panel discussion regarding issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in partnership between Rio Salado College and the American Public University System. My name is Dr. Janet Athanasiou. I use she, her pronouns. And I am delighted to welcome you to this event. I get the honor of serving as moderator and host for today. We have a very special event for you planned today involving a keynote address from Kyle Mitchell and a conversation between Kyle and a current American Public University System student, Bridget Kimsey. Before I begin, I would like to ask that we engage in a moment of silence and reflection to recognize the ongoing effects of the current pandemic and lives lost in acts of senseless violence, and also just sort of a moment to pause and reflect for all that's going on in the world. Thank you. Just as some background, these panels started because of our institution leaders and others across the higher education industry were engaging in conversations regarding issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we're hopeful that even as the world begins to open back up and we sort of return to this pre-pandemic sense of normalcy, that we will continue to have these conversations both in our own lives and in our online communities. As we complete the second year of the partnership and these panel discussions, we wanted to focus on storytelling and the importance of sharing your stories. As author Kendra Hall reminds us, someone needs to hear your story in order to finish their own. As such, we're sharing these stories from those in our communities and on our campuses in order to provide inspiration to all of you so that you can help finish your own story. This event provides a safe, welcoming space to discuss issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging on college campuses, born from the desire to recognize that there is a lot that higher education has done to move this discussion forward and a lot that we can still be doing. Our event today is in November, which is National Native American Heritage Month, a time to recognize and promote the heritage, culture, and experiences of the Indigenous peoples in what is now the United States. Our discussion today focuses on recognizing and celebrating Indigenous peoples of the United States and the influence of storytelling on culture. Before we dive in, I would like to take a moment to introduce and thank representatives from both Rio Salado College and the American Public University System. Dr. Kate Smith is the president of Rio Salado College, and Dr. Marie Harper is the provost of American Public University System, and they are valuable sponsors of today's event. They have supported our joint work in this area, and they made today's discussion possible. So Dr. Smith and then Dr. Harper, I invite you both to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you so much, Janet, and welcome all. I'm so thrilled to be together today as we celebrate Native American Heritage Month together. I'm so grateful for our friends and partners at the American Public University System, and I'd invite you all to join me in thanking our partners who really work hard to put on our quarterly Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging series. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Marie Gold Harper, who you'll hear from momentarily, Carolyn Simpson, Dr. Janet, who you just heard from, and Haley Hawthorne. Thank you all very much. From Rio Salado College, I also would like to ask you to join me in thanking Dr. Floyd Harden, Marissa Tarango, and Michelle Reese for their tireless efforts in bringing these seminars together for all of us. And then finally, I'd like to thank our Indigenous Initiative leads. And that'd be Linda Cooper, Kirsten Thomas, John Bastian, and Dr. Ramona Cox. So go ahead and give a little shout out if you see them or thank them. We appreciate them all so much. And of course, a special thank you to the APUS president, Dr. Fernando Nuno, for supporting this event, for supporting our partnership, and for supporting these very important diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work that we're doing together. And thank you to all of you in attendance for making time and investing your energy to learn more about our Native American heritage traditions. And in particular today, we're super excited to hear from from South Mountain Community College, Kyle Mitchell, who's really gonna take us through some learning around storytelling. And storytelling really connects us with the past, the present, and the future, and shares our experiences with one another, and is truly an incredibly powerful teaching tool. Kyle, I'm so looking forward to learning from you today. Storytelling is such a powerful art and science. And so I can't wait. So let me stop talking for that point. I just thank everybody for joining us today. I look forward to our time together and really appreciate that we're able to this is part of fulfilling our vision to empower learners everywhere through innovative education. So with that, Dr. Harper.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. It is a pleasure to be here today to celebrate an occasion that we have been on a journey with for a while. From its inception, I believe that this partnership has been very valuable for both communities. We have collaborated, put together various programs that I think have been beneficial for both institutions. I truly believe the work that we have done in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is at the forefront of things that are being done in higher education communities today. We are a leader and we should be proud of that. So as we enjoy the session today, please take note, there has been a lot of hard work put into each of these workshops. We have enjoyed it, we believe in it, and we want to share what we have done with you, the communities that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you both, Dr. Smith and Dr. Harper. That was great. I'm going to take a moment now to introduce our keynote speaker, Kyle Mitchell. Kyle is a Dene storyteller, educator, and veteran. He grew up on the reservation with his grandparents, where he learned the family's work ethic and oral tradition daily. After graduating high school, he enlisted in the Army as an infantryman, where he served 2 tours, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. Discharged from the military, he decided to pursue his higher education at South Mountain Community College, and later went on to Arizona State University. Kyle's currently the program manager for South Mountain Community College's Vice President of Academic Affairs, manager of extended campuses in Guadalupe and Levine, and an adjunct faculty member at the Storytelling Institute at South Mountain Community College. He believes that sharing the power of oral traditions can reinforce individuals' sense of self-identity and break stereotypes towards Indigenous communities. Welcome, Kyle. It's an honor for you to be here with us.
Thank you very much, Janet. I appreciate that introduction. Thank you, Dr. Smith and Dr. Harper, for those kind words. So my name is Kyle Mitchell. I'm going to jump in. So as you heard, I am a veteran, an educator, and a storyteller. Depending on where I'm talking, I'll switch up those 3, just to meet the audience needs. So I am Dene, which is what we reference ourselves as Navajos. And so within my culture, what we do is we always introduce ourselves. And so I'm going to do that, then I'll do a brief explanation on this. And so the ASL interpreter, I'm going to get through some of this, some of these Indigenous words. So in our language, we call it Dinibazat, so Navajo language. Yate, She'e Kyle Mitchell Yinshia, Twitachini Nishle, Nakai Basichin, Ke Ani Deshiche, Nakai Deshinella, Shiche A Jim Mitchell-Willia, Shemasana A Ali Mitchell-Willia, Shema A Diana Panana-Willia, Kiltsui Bitwa, Aldo Chejna Dozi Dana Shah. So everybody, I just did my intro there. And the reason why we do that within Navajo culture. And so when I first said, hello, my name is, and I followed up by what we have within our Dene culture, within our kinship, is we know, not we just believe, but we know that everybody in this world is made up of 4 clans. And how we come to that is everybody has a mother, everybody has a father, your mother has a father, and your father has a father. And so my first clan is Twitachini, which is translated means the bitter water people. A quick funny story, kind of a little cultural awareness also, is within our culture. So anybody who is Twitachini and has that first same clan is automatically my brother and my sister, right? That's just how we relate to one another. And within our own culture, in our extended families, all of our cousins tend to become our brothers and our sisters as we relate to them. And so I remember years ago, my son at that time was just in kindergarten, starting off in kindergarten. I remember we went to our first ever parent-teacher conference. We get there and the teacher's looking at us kind of weird, like, okay. And, we felt a little weird about it. So finally at the end of our parent-teacher conference, she just said, I'm sorry for this intrusion, but I wanted to ask, how many kids is it that you have? Because you both look so great. You're so young. And then my wife and I look at each other and we said, we only have the one, just our son. And she says, well, I was curious because Dominic would come to school every Monday saying that he hung out with his brothers this weekend. And then the next weekend he was hanging out with his sisters. And then the next weekend it was a mixture of both brothers and sisters. And so we laughed a little bit, we chuckled, and then we explained how our culture, how we view kinship. And so we explained that our cousins are actually our brothers and sisters. And much to her dismay, we let her know we do not have a dozen children. We only have one. And so I always share that because that's funny. And if you run into other Navajos, they relate that same way. And I know there's other nations, other tribal nations across the country that do the same. We relate to our brothers, our cousins as our brothers, sisters, our cousin sisters, cousin brothers. And so that's that. A little bit about me is I grew up on, actually what I'm going to do is, since we're doing storytelling, is what we're going to do is we're going to take a mental drive, okay? And what we're going to do, for those of you on the East Coast, you're going to jump on to where the Route 66 used to be, which is parallel to the I-40, okay? And if you're in the Valley, we're going to jump on the 17 or on the 87, and we're going to make our way up. And so we're going to get to this little sleepy town in northern Arizona in the high desert. And it was made famous by a singer who was in jail overnight. And the only thing he can see was outside in the street. And that song became the identity for this town. That song is etched in every resident of that community. And it all has to do with standing on a corner, right? Where? In Winslow, Arizona. Yes, standing on the corner, Take It Easy by the Eagles. That's where we'll start. So from Winslow, Arizona, we go north about 40 miles. And now we're in what we call DEIB. Yeah, that's the Navajo land. That's within our boundaries. Nowadays, we call that the reservation. So we're up on the Navajo reservation, and we're about 40 miles north of Winslow. And then there's an intersection with Navajo 15. And so it runs east to west. But if you look to the northwest corner, there's a mountain that's shaped like a pyramid. Actually, BLM calls it Pyramid Butte. Some of the locals there call it the anthill because it looks like a perfect cone. It's the anthill. But more intimately, we call that Chesnadozi, the mountain with the streaks on it. And more intimately, we call that Kiltsuibitwa. And so that's where I was born and raised with my grandparents. And so I grew up on the reservation. We didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. We got electricity about 15 years ago. And so a lot of the labor that we did was outside. So if you could think something like a rural area, extremely rural, maybe kind of a farmland, that would be the setting. And so we're up in northern Arizona in the high desert. There's not a whole lot of vegetation. There's enough tumbleweeds to cover the whole state up there. We do get snow in the winter, and we do get into the hundreds in the summer. So truly, you get to experience all the seasons there. And so growing up with my grandparents, I was, a young boy. Most of the time, what I did is when I went to school, I went to the boarding school. And so I'd be at school pretty much Monday through Friday, sleep there in the dorm, and then get picked up on the weekends and come back home. And so when I would go back home, my grandfather, which I'll refer to as my Che. And so Che is grandfather, Masana is grandmother. And so I remember the thing that my grandparents loved to do, absolutely loved to do, is once the sun would go down and it would be setting on that western horizon, slowly sinking in, slowly, turning different shades of orange. And from the view from our back door, you could see the San Francisco peaks and the mountain and those mountains surrounding. And it was just beautiful. And the sun would slowly set and disappear. And the great thing about not having electricity and being out in a rural area is that there is absolutely no light pollution. You could look up into the sky and literally see stars from horizon to horizon. Just beautiful. And so we would sit outside. My Che and my grandma, they would sit on those old school folding chairs, right? Those aluminum ones, the ones that you had to be extra careful to open. And if you did it the wrong way, you could potentially lose some skin on your finger. Yes, that's what they sat on. And me being the small young kid at the time, I grabbed either a cinder block to sit on, or I just flipped the 5-gallon bucket upside down. And that's where I sat. And my grandparents would often look up at the stars and tell stories about it. And so one story that they shared, I'm going to share a few. One story in particular had to do with what we call Naikwas. And I'll give the translation in a bit, but we'll build the story for now. So in Navajo culture, we believe that we emerged to where we are today. And my grandfather told me of how Naikwas was created. He says, long time ago, before there was anybody on this world where we are today, that there was complete darkness. And so it was the first man and the first woman, along with the deities, that decided to create some landmarks and some navigations and the how-tos of life. And so what they decided to do was bring minerals with them. And they brought these minerals and these rock shapes, and what they did is they placed them on the stone and they grinded them down. They grinded them down until they were nothing but dust. And then they would get the pieces, scrape them together, and roll them together. Much like you see little kids playing with Play-Doh, right? Just kind of rolling them up in little balls, laying them down, placing them here, placing them there. And the intention from first man and first woman were to give the lessons of life, give the book of life basically to the Dene in the sky. And so they started organizing constellations and started putting things together, this, laying everything out perfectly. And then what they decided to do was get the first biggest star they had, the brightest star, and they put that up in the sky. And that became Naikwas. And the reason why they put that there was because that does two things. Number one is it symbolizes the fire within the home. And the way it's set up is the constellation surrounding it is the male and the female. And so it symbolizes, the home in a sense of a mother and a father role of that nature. The second thing it does is it actually gives people literal directions, their cardinal directions. So if we translate Naikwas becomes the North Star. And so we were sitting down, my Che was telling that story to me. And my Che was a Korean War veteran. He was a paratrooper. And much like, normal combat veterans, at least the older ones, they didn't share much about their time. He rarely spoke of anything, except for this one night. I remember he looked at Naikwas, and he said, when I was in Korea, he said, Korea was an amazing, beautiful country. He said there would just be rolling hills from end to end. And the grass, tall green grass, would go up to their chest. He said he would stand up on top of the hill, look out, and he would see a sea of green just moving in the wind as the wind moved the blades of grass left to right, and it swayed like the ocean. And so he told a story about a time of when they had to leave one position and go to another position. And my Che at this time was a platoon sergeant, so he was a little bit higher in the enlisted ranks. And so he said they set out with 30 men. So 30 men they set out with, and they started making their way. And as they made their way, he said the sun was slowly going down, slowly going down. He said when it was just about to disappear, and there was just that little tip that you could barely see of light there, that's when they heard the gunshots, the snaps, the pops, the cracks that are correlated with the firefights. He said everybody jumped down, everybody laid down on the ground. And then after some time, he got up, took a knee, still in the grass, looking around, and now the stars were starting to come out. He looked back and he started counting his men, and they went from 30 to 15. And all of them were scared. They didn't know what to do. They were looking at my Che, and my Che said, well, we have to keep going. We can't stay here. And so what he did is he looked up and he found the constellations, and he found where Naikus would be. And so what he did is he kept Naikus over his left shoulder, and he crouched down. And so he led his 15 men to the next point of where they needed to be. And so he got done telling that story, and he did what all men do, our majority of older men do, when you get a little bit of emotion, right? And he shook it off. And I remember looking up at him when he did that. I remember one of the very, very, very few times of seeing his eyes watery. And so my grandmother reaches over me, pats him on the knee, and just tells him, it's okay. We're good. We're here. And so my grandmother leans into me and tells me, remember Naikus. Remember that that's what was put here for us. That will always lead you home. That will always remind you of home. And if you ever get lost somewhere where you don't know, wait until nightfall and look up to the sky, and the stars will show you the way. And I said, okay, you really, and still understanding, still learning things. And then now fast forward about 11 years. 11 years. Now I'm older. I'm a young man. I'm on my second deployment in Afghanistan. And this was in the early 2000s. And my time in the military, I was an infantryman. And my job with 10th Mountain at this time in Afghanistan, early 2000s, was to watch all the mountain passes, right? So our mountain supply routes coming in through Afghanistan, coming in through China. My job and my team's job was to watch those borders, right? And engage if we needed to do, and just do our job. But the one thing was the team I was part of was a reconnaissance team. And so there was only 10 of us. And my job on my team was to be the lead scout. So I was always out front, always looking, do we go left? Do we go right? If we go right, if we make engagement, how do we respond to that? Right. And so on and so forth. So constantly critical thinking, constantly situational awareness, looking at the topography. And so another thing in the early 2000s is we did not have all the cool stuff that the military has now, right? I think we had one satellite phone for our whole company. We still had radios, which we do now, but being up in the mountains in a higher elevation, often the radio frequencies would be affected by the sun. So during the day, we would have completely, perfectly fine radio frequency. And as the sun went down, we would get very, very spotty frequencies. And so one time we had to make our way from one mountain pass to another. And so we got dropped off in Black Hawks. And so we get dropped off about 8,000 feet. And we were told that we had to come up and over the crust and on to the next point, which was going to be going up to 11,000 and then back to 10,000 and then plateau around 9,000. And so for those of you who don't know, high elevation is extremely rough. And the way that I explain to people when I talk about moving through higher elevations is imagine you're on the treadmill and you have a good speed going, right? You're at a really good jog, almost a sprint. And then what I want you to do is cover your mouth, right? And then you just feel there's barely any oxygen coming in. And so that's how it felt walking through those mountains. And so as we were making our way, we heard, enemy was moving in. We really needed to move as quick as we could to our next point. but we were all worried about the radio frequency. If we did make engagement, what was going to happen? We couldn't call for fire. We couldn't call for air support. And so we sat there, everybody was kind of waiting around as the officers were talking back and forth. And so finally they said, all right, Mitchell called me on the mic and they said, are you good to go? Can you lead us through the night? And I told them, I said, yeah, I'm good to go. I said, I just need some time to get my bearings. And so what I did is I got down to one knee, drink my water. I took off my Kevlar, my helmet. And so what I did is I looked up in the sky and I started looking around. And sure enough, I looked and the one star that looked back at me was Nyquist. And so I radioed back and I said, yes, I'm good to go. I got my markings. I got my bearings. We're good to go. And so I put my helmet back on, right? Put my water away, threw my pack on, had my rifle, and started walking. And I did the same thing as my Jay did before. I kept Nyquist over my left shoulder and made it. And so we walked, and we made our way, and we got to where we needed to be. And so that was how Nyquist directly helped me there. And now we'll fast forward again another 6 years. All right. So 6 years later, right, post-military life, now I am a student at South Mountain Community College, and it's in the summertime. And if you have been to Phoenix in the summertime, it is a toasty 115 plus. And so what do we all do if we live in the valley? If we want to get away and experience the outdoors, we go up to what we call the rim country, up on the Mogollon Rim. And if you're not familiar with that, it is a higher elevation and it is dense forest with a bunch of ponderosa pine. And so it's amazing. Once you drive up from the valley, you start making your way higher elevation, the temperature starts dropping. And so as we're driving up, I'm telling the boys, I take my son with me and then my two younger cousins. And I figure, let's just do a guys, boys weekend, go camping. And so we're driving our way up. We get up through Payson, which is about midway, and then we make our way up to the rim. So we get to the forest and we get to our campsite. I have the boys clear everything out. We lay out our tent, get everything set up. And then the boys want to do what boys want to do. They want to go swimming. They want to go fishing. I said, okay. But remember this rule, boys, that we are only going to eat whatever you catch today. So let's spend some time fishing. Well, if you know anything about little boys, you know that their attention span is not that great, right? And if there's something that's exciting that they can do with their hands, they're always going to divert to that. And that's exactly what they did. They went from fishing for 10 minutes to swimming around for about an hour in the lake. And we had a good time. I remember we walked back to our campsite and it was beautiful. I mean, we're just up in the high country with the pines. It's in the summer. And so you feel that nice, cool breeze, that just rustles through the pine needles, rustles the pine needles on the ground. You can smell the pine cones and everything around you. It's in the peak of the summer, beautiful summer day. And so I got back and I said, okay, well, what did we catch today? Because that's what we're eating. And we all looked at each other. They looked at me and they said, well, we didn't catch anything. No problem. I have a backup plan. So I packed some hot dogs and some hamburgers. We started the grill and began doing that. So I grilled for the kids. We laid everything out. And as the coals were dying down, the sun was going down also. And so the beauty of being in the forest is we looked up and you could just see the opening right above us with the clearing. And so the sun was slowly going down. We're looking up into the sky and could see the different hues of orange, a little bit of purple as the horizon started, or the sun started to set. And so, the boys were poking around at the fire, like little boys do, playing back and forth. And what they decided to do was tell stories. And the funny thing was they're little boys. So they're poking at it with their stick. And the older boys are telling my son, who was younger, they were like, you know what, if zombies come tonight, here's what we're going to do. We're going to chase them off, blah, 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 blah. And my son, being the youngest and not to be outdone, says, well, you know what? I have this stick and I have this stick because there are going to be dinosaurs. And so that started this huge, funny conversation about being in the woods, right? In the middle of nowhere, of all the unforeseen things that can happen. And so that conversation dwindled, went down. And as the conversation died down, so did the coals of the fire. And they started turning the embers into that beautiful orange tone. And I remember laying down. So I went beside the fire. I remember laying down my back, tucking one hand behind my head and then the other. And I looked up and I saw the night sky, just beautiful, just clear as can be, crystal clear, so much so that you could literally see the stars twinkling. And I sat there and I was just laying down, and my son comes over, lays next to me, and then my other two little cousins come by and lay on the other side. And we're looking up there, and then my little cousins start naming the constellations. Oh, there's this. Oh, there's that. I think this is that, and so on and so forth. And my son, not to be outdone and be an avid dinosaur lover, was there's a T-Rex, there's a velociraptor, there's this, there's that. And we all started laughing and, you know, just joking around about what things they could be. They kind of look like this, they kind of look like that. And then the conversation died again. And this time, as the conversation died, the only thing that we could hear was the crackling of the fire, and then the rustle of the pine needles as the wind blew through. That nice, gentle breeze, slowly swaying the tent, slowly swaying the branches of the trees. And I took a deep breath and I looked up and I said, you know, that star right there. I said, you see where the Big Dipper is? Let's follow that star. And they're like, yeah, we know that's a North Star. And I said, yeah, well, that's what we know today as the North Star. But let me tell you a story of how that came to be. And I shared the story that my Che shared with me. And then I took it a step further and I shared how Na'ikwas, the North Star, helped my Che. And then in turn, I told them that a few years ago, I was in Afghanistan and I used Na'ikwas to help me. And the boys were quiet, you know, uncertain quiet. And so I looked over at my son, I looked over at the boys, and they said, but there's something else. Besides it's just being the North Star, the reason why it's Na'ikwas is because it symbolizes home. So as you get older, as you make different choices in life, some good, some bad, always remember when the stars are out, you can look up and you can find Na'ikwas. If you're missing home, that will rekindle your heart, fill your spirit again. And heavens forbid, if you're lost somewhere where you have no idea, just find Na'ikwas and he'll help you get to where you need to be. Thank you. And so that story there, you know, the reason why I shared that is because the way it moves and it weaves through with storytelling, right? We take a cultural story, right? Something that's rooted within Diné culture, within Navajo culture, a story that is universal to Navajos. And what my family was able to do, more particularly my grandma, my Che, is they were able to bring that down from a universal view and bring it close to a personal insight, right? Giving it that human experience of what it really means to us. Not only what it means to us, but how it can help us, and proven experience of how it has helped us. And so when I think about storytelling, and I think about weaving that, that's exactly what it is. It's taking that oral tradition, that cultural knowledge, infusing it with lived experiences, and then sharing it openly with audiences for that human experience. Because even if you're not Navajo, even if you're not Diné, even if you're not Indigenous, you've still been outside at night. You're still able to look up and see the stars. And now when you look up, you'll be able to look at the North Star. But I hope that you look at it in the way I tell my son to look at it. If you're going through a hard time, school, work, family, whatever it may be, just look up and know that once upon a time, somebody put that there for us to remind us that we have belonging, that we each belong somewhere. We each have a home. And in addition to that, you know, if you're ever lost, Just look up and find that star and get your bearing, and you'll be able to get to safety, get to cover, get to whatever you need to do. And so I just want to share that brief little story. And what I want to do is share another story with you. Another story. And so this one is a little shorter. It's a little funny. So along the same structure of learning, right, our cultural stories and understanding the impact. In the very beginning, I talked about Na'ikos, right, being created through first man and first woman. But how were they created? Well, let me tell you. So as I said before, we emerged to where we are today. There was other worlds before this. And so there was actually a third world we were in. And at this time, there was nothing but insects and animals. There was no human. There was no Dene at that time. And so the deities got the insects together and the animals together, and they said, we really need to create something in our image that will help move this world forward. And so what they did is they gathered together on a sacred mountain, and they had the deities there. And what they did is they started singing songs, and they started saying prayers. And as they started saying that, they had Nashnish, which is the wind. Nashnish came in, and he moved from the east to the west, and then from the south to the north, and then the west to the east, and then finally north to the south, all around those directions. And after Nashnish was done, he left, moved away. And now, in the center of all these deities and these beings became first man and first woman. And how do we know they were first man and first woman? Well, they were created in the image of the deities because they had 5 fingers, which we still have today. And within Navajo culture, we still know and we see every day remnants of first man and first woman and of Nashnish. And so everybody, even if you're at home, wherever you are, I want you to have both your palms out or one hand. It's okay. And I want you to turn them towards you. Okay. And I want you to focus on one finger, and I want you to look down at your fingerprints. So Western culture, right, our society, we see that as fingerprints. Within the net context, we believe that those are remnants. All the swirls and all the lines that cover all of your skin are remnants of Nashnish, giving the gift of life to first man and first woman. And so if you look down at your hands, you can see remnants of that still today. And so move forward. I told you about growing up on the reservation. Another thing that I did growing up, my mom did when she retired as a paramedic, is she became a vendor. And so we would go to swap meets, we go to art shows and everything. My mom made arts and crafts. And I remember being a little kid and thinking, you know what? I've been a foodie all my life, because anywhere we went to, any swap meet, any arts and crafts, I would always go for the food. Like that was my main focus. And my mom was tired of always giving me money. Like, you know what, you're eating a lot, you're wearing husky jeans, you might need to dial it down a little bit. But I said, no, I love my food. And so my mom said, well, maybe you should start making your own money. I can teach you how to do something. And so I said, okay, well, what can I do? My mom said, well, you can make a dream catcher. I was like, a dream catcher? Okay. And so I've seen them before. I really didn't know what they were. And being a young kid, my mom was talking to me and telling me the value of it. But as a little kid, it went in one ear and out the other. And I finally was able to produce a few, right? And then the next weekend we went to an arts and crafts show, and somebody bought one. I was like, oh my gosh, I now have money. And so what I did with that crisp $10 bill is I ran over and I got my favorite snacks, which was a pickle and nachos. Amazing combo. If you have not done so, I highly recommend it. And so, that's how I started learning skills. And my mom was really big on, using your hands, right? Using your motor skills, really putting things together, making arts and crafts. And so I did that for a few years, as a young teen, and it kind of fizzled out. And I was, and, later on, I was in Afghanistan, right? And I told you about early 2000s, right? And so the hard thing about being part of like reconnaissance team and a small team is that you have to build from nothing. Like we would get to places that were essentially untouched without, American presence, and we would build what we called observation points, right, or an outpost, however you want to frame that. We would build those from just sandbags, and then when we had more people, they would come and they do supply drops of these HESCOs, and these HESCOs are giant, probably maybe 4 feet by 4 feet or so. They have a wire frame around the outside with a burlap lining. And so what we do with that is we fill that with sand, because that stops incoming fire, whether it be small arms, whether it be RPGs or bigger fire, enemy fire. That's what that held. And so every time they would drop these, from the helicopter, it would come down and then boom, break into a million pieces most of the time. And so what we would do is we would go and pick them up and pick them up. And I remember one time I was picking up and there was just a bunch of loose wire. And I was missing my family. I was getting homesick. I was there probably my 10th month at that time, my 10th of 14 that I did. And so what I did is I grabbed some of the wires and I just started just making a circle, right? Just kind of just wrapping it round and round and round. And as I finally looked at it, I was like, you know what? This almost looks like a hoop. This, maybe I could do something with this. So what I did is I went into my pack and I grabbed our paracord, 550 cord, and I cut it and I took out some of the innards because it has tons of little innards in there, little thin white strings. And I took one out and then I started wrapping it. And I was just thinking of home, right? We were laughing, we were talking, eating our MREs with my team. And I just started moving, my hands naturally doing what they do. And I started making a dream catcher. And the funny thing about it was, I just did it, and I had it kind of laying there, and I started making a few of them. So I made like 2 of them, and I was just kind of joking around with the guys. I said, look what I made. So I made when I was a kid, and they're like, yeah, that's cool, whatever. And so there was a time when we would have local Afghanis come in to help us, right? Whether it be filling sand or doing whatever we needed help with. And there was an old Afghani man. He much looked like men in my community, right? Brown, dark brown skin, jet black hair, tall stature, very friendly eyes. And he looked at me and he kind of turned his head side to side. And the interpreter came over. Interpreter said, he wants to know where you're from. And so I tried my best to explain, and he was like, oh, okay. But the concept of indigenous people in America, is very foreign to them. At least those in the northern regions. And so as we were talking, he's asking me questions. I went down and I was looking in my bag for something to give him, a snack or whatever it was. And when I was pulling the snack out of the bag, one of my dream catchers fell out. And he looked down at it and he just was perplexed. He started pointing at it. He started hitting the interpreter. And the interpreter said he really, really wants to know what that is and what's it for. And so I was trying not to chuckle. I reached down, I grabbed it, and I held it up. And then I told him, I said, it's a dream catcher, and it does this. And where it came from was the Indigenous peoples, the First Nations people up in Canada. They believed that the dream catcher would help their children sleep at night. And so what would happen essentially is the hoop here, you have all the webbing in between, is all the bad dreams would get lost in there. And at the very center, they put a bead in there. Sometimes they have little drapes coming down, and they believe that that's where the good dreams get filtered out, and they go, into your mind to have a good night rest. And so he looked at it and he was like, wow. He said, the Afghani man said, I really want one. He's like, I want it. And so I looked at the interpreter, and the interpreter was telling me, maybe you should ask him for something in return. This is a good bargaining chip. I was like, I don't know. And he said, they have really good chickens here. And I was like, I want chicken, because if you eat MREs, or if you had 8 MREs, they are not so palatable for 10 months straight. Just put it that way. So any type of fresh meat we could get, I would acquire it. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to bargain a dream catcher for a chicken. And so I gave him the dream catcher, and he gave me the most plump, delicious, rotisserie style looking chicken. Oh, and it was amazing. And the funny thing was, it was every other day, there would be a new Afghani coming to me, asking me for a dream catcher. And so I don't know how many I handed out in the little hamlets that we covered. I would say close to 30. And when I think about that, I think about that impact. I didn't realize it when I was there at the time until I was older, that, the teachings of hands in general, the teachings of the first man, first woman, the creation of our hands, of our fingers and what they mean, and the skills that my mother gave me and how to create art from scratch. And also to know that art is healing, right? It rejuvenates the spirit. It made me happy when I was in Afghanistan making those dream catchers. But then the bigger thing it did is it showed the people there a new Indigenous person. And they were able to experience a small, tiny bit of fracture of culture. But for that, they were forever gracious. And to know that impact was made, because all I had to do was use my own two hands and some scrap pieces laying around, that really made me value, how we came to be and how our fingers came to be. And so what I recommend everybody to do is, if you have time, right? Because everybody's a storyteller. Everybody's a storyteller, not just me, not just people who are talking on TV and doing these things, but every individual is a storyteller. And if you think, well, I really don't have any stories, what I want you to do is get your hands again, turn them around and look at them and reflect on the things they've done, the hands they've shaken, the projects they helped build, the emails they crafted to make change within an organization, the times they've typed that one midterm paper that you waited it all the way until the 11th hour to do. But those were all given to us for a reason, because we're all created in the light, in the image of the deities. Thank you. Right.
Thank you so much, Kyle. This was great. I've been in constant conversation with those of us in the background, sort of talking about what we're taking away from your stories. I particularly like the idea of my fingerprints being remnants of first man and first woman, sort of bringing the past with me and my own ancestors with me going forward. Before we bring Bridget into the conversation as well, I did want to a couple of things that had come up through the chat. One was that when you were talking about the North Star and you were using the Navajo word for North Star, someone asked if you could spell that, and so.
Okay, yeah. I'll look it up because phonetically I'm challenged, but I can. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat for you, Chrissy. Thank you.
And then also the idea is, if your story is written down anywhere where we could share it with other people. So I know that given that we're talking about a lot of oral tradition, just wondered if there was somewhere where it was also written down.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there are a few publications out there, I would say. We're in a place right now in 2020 of where we're reclaiming our history, right? We're writing our own history. And so I'll be sure to do a few recommendations to the group on some Indigenous writers. And yeah, definitely. I don't mind sharing that. So Naiquist and a book or two, definitely.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to introduce our student panelist now, Bridget Kimsey, who is an APUS student. She is a registered Lenape Indian of the Delaware Nation, and she's been working inside of the global Indigenous research methods and Western scientific methods for 30 years in healthcare, writing, research policy, security. Excuse me. Bridget's training runs along the spectrum of biology, chemistry, engineering, and physics. She has an undergraduate degree in science technology, engineering, and math, and is currently working on her Master's of Science degree in space studies with a concentration in astronomy from American Public University System. She's a published author of 4 books, and her goals are to continue to research and write in the findings and the bridge between Indigenous ways of knowing and Western ways of knowing, and to continue to teach and work on projects, including patient care, and to earn her PhD in artificial intelligence. And so welcome, Bridget. We are delighted to have you. And I'm delighted to begin to, if you're both ready, we'll begin to sort of start the conversation with some questions. And I do want to say to anybody in attendance today, if you have questions for Bridget and for Kyle, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will get to them as well. So, but yeah, I guess to get started, because Kyle shared a couple of stories regarding his family, and wanted to talk about start our conversation talking about family. And if you each could share a story about a time where you felt really supported and like you belonged in your family structure.
Oh, well, I can say that my upbringing was not great. I'm going to be real honest. A lot of abuse and very dysfunctional. So I felt like I really began to come home when I was at New York University undergraduate, and I bumped into the American Indian Community House around the age of 19, and I stayed there for about 7 years. And they really raised me, I would say, to be the person I am today. I had everything through them, from social work to inclusion, job training program, help with school, and definitely aunties and elders there took me under their wing and saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. But one of the first things that I learned was the power of language and the word, and that I had to be very mindful of what I said and to be very clear with my words. So I'd already been involved with language as a performing artist, and had studied many plays and been involved in that more, both with movement and storytelling through the performing arts were very healing. So that was another very strong home for me. But as far as my culture, the American Indian Community House was my base that crafted everything, so many things. So I feel very thankful and honored to have had that experience and how it helped shape me going forward.
I love that family isn't just necessarily the biology, but also the culture and where you find your home.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I noticed at AICH, it serves about, or I don't know that it's still together, but it served about 10,000 Native peoples from around the country that found themselves in the New York City tri-state area there, whether for school, work, just moving through. So it was a really wonderful way to meet people from all different nations in our country. And you're right, like that was a grounding and really educated me as a person when I didn't get that at home. And I found that among many other Native Indigenous people that were there, we unfortunately had a lot of similar struggles, from alcoholism in our family, drug addiction at the time. HIV/AIDS was really rampant, heroin addiction. It was both a place to grieve and to heal and to learn new skills and to ground into a collective past. And I think that is why, when my elders kind of pushed me more into looking at global Indigenous methods as far as the healing modalities in more clinical and ambulatory settings, I was sort of surprised, like, well, that's not Native, but they were looking at the Indigenous throughout all of humanity and sort of what would be a good match for me in the work they saw that I might be able to bring to the table in sort of the STEM field, which I really didn't see at the time, because I was also in taking creative arts therapy classes at NYU, which has a really strong creative arts therapy. So art therapy was very interesting to me as well. So they kind of weave that in for me. But yes, it doesn't have to be just the family you're raised in. And having, I worked with a lot of people whose families had been through the boarding school situation, their grandparents or even their parents. So taking some of the real pain and suffering and creating a home to heal and learn new skills was absolutely amazing. So yeah. Thank you.
Kyle?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that insight, Bridget. It was great.
Thanks.
Let's see, so a time of when I felt community, right, or felt supported within my family. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a little bit of vulnerability on my side, but I think it's something that really shows a testament to culture and to family. So within Navajo culture, we have a lot of different ceremonies, and one of the largest, and I mean largest ceremonies that we have is what we call a Nadant. And in the Nadant, translated, is the enemy way ceremony. And it's the oldest ceremony that we have in our culture. And the purpose for this is actually to help PTSD and to really, to really identify what it means and how we heal within our own our teachings and our culture. And so I remember, growing up on the reservation, like I always considered myself a res boy, this, went to the military, did all that, and just, was just kind of arrogant and headstrong. And I started having PTSD issues here and there, and I didn't know what to do. I really, kind of was at loss, and I was too proud to go to the VA, too proud to do a lot of things, just kind of being young and arrogant. And so what I finally did is I went home. I remember going home to my grandparents, and I just told them, I said, I need help. Like, something is not right. I can't get past this bump. There's something kind of going on. And so my Che just called it out for what it was. He just said, well, what's going on? What's happening? And so I was able to share what was bothering me, what was going on. And him and my grandmother, they both looked at me and said, you're going to be okay. And so what they did is they helped gather people and put on my first Nadant. And so I mean, it is a big ceremony. So normally most of our other ceremonies are maybe like 20 people, maybe 25 at the most. But our Nadants are actually like hundreds of people, because as I referenced before, Twitachini, right? That's my first clan. So all of my brothers and sisters from all over Dunipacat came. Like, there was people that came from New Mexico side, people that came from Utah, just all over, because they understand the power of what that ceremony does. And so it was at that moment of kind of my aha moment, right? That here is living tradition, living culture, and active healing. Yes. That was put here in place for me, from me, by me. And so that totally changed my whole perspective on what it was. The sense of belonging, sense of purpose was rekindled. So yeah, long-winded, I know, Janet, sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you both, both for sharing stories and for being vulnerable in a group, in an online seminar. It's always, I'm always really appreciative when people want to share their stories. So thinking about personal stories, and you both have established academic and professional careers. So thinking about that, as you explored your own personal story, how did you feel that was aligning with your career path? And like, did you find they might have been in sync, or maybe there was a little bit of disconnect, and how sharing your story may have influenced your professional career?
Oh man, that's a big one there. I mean, I think coming back to traditions I learned at American Indian Community House and having that anchor, I think it's interesting you're mentioning about the North Star, because as some know, my name North Bear. So North and the North Star, is sort of, I am leading myself where I need to go out of the amount of trauma that is on both sides, both from the Irish and the Lenape side. And I'm going to have to be the one as the bear internally, even though I'm part of the Tukwistak or Teme clan, the Wolf clan, I'm still having to navigate my way. And so that stuff that elders, or that I was taught about at 18 or 19 didn't really resonate. Some of it hasn't even come into like just like last year, you know, like during the pandemic, like, oh, that's what they were saying. Like it's taken time. Our brains have not changed in 10,000 years. You know, things go so fast nowadays, but we take time to digest and understand maybe what others are seeing in us. But I would say for me, having to be my own, sort of own compass, because I don't have that. I can see that in Native community that I'm part of. I have to keep finding ways every day to anchor in and stay within the eye of the storm and make decisions that speak the closest to my heart, my soul, and my brain, all kind of working together and keeping that kind of a clean slate. And I have found that there are ways I start to know that doesn't quite feel right, that doesn't quite, you know, and I really have to be mindful. My grandmother, my Native grandmother, went on to earn her professor at Towson State University in early childhood at a time when this wasn't really happening. You know, Oklahoma, Texas, in the middle of rural, you know, went on to Columbia. And you know, she said, if I had it to do all over again, I wish I just wanted to teach my little kindergartner and first graders. I'm not going to say I made a mistake, but I got pressured into stuff that wasn't a good match for me. And for me, you know, I understand it looks great on, you know, and that was, you know, so learning from those experiences helped me to keep going. I've had lots of ways to go in my different career paths, but I always come back to what do I wish to explore? What's the most important to me? Let the rest go and keep following that. And then the job and the financial and the education kind of fall in line with that. And that even comes into, for example, choosing which school I decided to go for my master's. I was accepted into some really great named schools. I'm not saying APUS isn't a great named school, but it goes a little under the radar maybe. But I really clicked with the administration. I clicked with the layout. I clicked with it in a way that was hard to describe. And so while colleagues might have said different things to me, I said, well, this is what feels right for me. And it has been proving to be, while not maybe modern or social, you know, like whatever, this has felt what's right for my heart and my compass. And so, you know, that has been the thing that has led me through all the different ebbs and flows of my career, is if it's resonating for me morally and ethically and following tenets I learned from elders, then I'm good. And if it's not, then I have to let it go, even if it's costing me money or prestige or whatever. It's just not important. I don't know if that answers your question. I can go off.
No, that's great. It's great. I appreciate it.
Right. Yeah. So the funny thing I have to say is, so for my own story, I guess I was infused with a lot of kind of underwriting in a way within the culture. For example, we have like Diné culture is so sophisticated and intricate. You know, our vocabulary, we have verbs, adjectives, nouns, we have everything. And so part of that is we have our understanding of our life path. And what I mean by that is we have certain benchmarks. And so we have, when we're born, right, from the time we're born till we're 2, we call that the baby time, right, infancy, and what things does a parent need to do and a community need to do to enforce that. And so as a male, when you reach an age of, I'd say, like, I think it's about 28, 30, that is the age that you're called a husteen. So husteen is a man, right? And so your expectation at that time is that you were given 28 years to get you ready to set your own path. And the hilarious thing, and it just kind of comes back to this, is, you know, I had no idea what to do when I was younger. Like I joined the military, you know, for a few different reasons, but life post-military, I really didn't know, you know, and that's a thing that a lot of people don't understand is with transition after military, you know, and I'm pretty sure some audience members, you know, prior service, is once you get out, you tend to hit that reset button, right? And then you're just back, you're not sure what you're doing. And so I you know, did what I thought was expected of me. You know, I went to school, you know, did a few things, and I was working with an accounting firm here in Phoenix, which was hilarious. And I say it's hilarious now because I'm in education, because I never, ever thought I'd be in education, ever, ever. And so where the aha moment happened was I was about, I think I was like 29, and there was a position that opened up at South Mountain. And it was a part-time, it's not a fancy job, to others, but it was a Hoopa Learning Coordinator. And so that is an American Indian scholarship that's here for all the Native American high school students within Maricopa County. And so it allows them to, it's like a bridge program. They can earn up to 24 credits while in high school. And, it's just a phenomenal program. And so I had one of the faculty members at the Storytelling Institute tell me like, hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this. And I was just thinking like, I don't know, like I haven't been around kids since I was the NCO, like I no idea. But what I knew and what I really felt with the community here, being in an urban environment, was that it was really hard to find culture, right? So a lot of urban natives now are maybe second gen at this point. And so that second gen is growing up, well-versed Western culture and understanding, but that indigenous knowledge isn't there. Mm-hmm. And so I took this small part-time job, and I gave it my all. I looked at what were the outcomes, what does the program look like, and I restructured everything. And I did it to not only educate students in a sense of academic, but educate them in the sense of culture, and really kind of build that organic community at the very molecular level, right? Everybody's coming in at different levels, but how do we bring everybody together? And story was that medium, right? Storytelling really kind of helped that. And so as I progressed in that role, the stars just aligned, because I started pulling, experience and knowledge from those prior 29 years of life. And so to me at that moment, everything aligned perfectly. You're exactly where you need to be. You're doing exactly what needs to be done. And so that would be my correlation to my personal story and fulfilling my professional career.
Awesome. I love it. And actually, it's a really great segue, thinking about our next question in terms of, because we've been talking about storytelling and the importance of sharing your own personal story. I'm just wondering if you have a story where you experienced a challenge in a personal or professional role, and how you were able to use, sharing your own story as a way to overcome that challenge.
Well, I would say I've always been trying to figure out how I fit, because, like with my dad, he was a scientist at Johns Hopkins as an electron microscopes in the medical part of Johns Hopkins. But you come to our house and it's covered in deer skins, and it's just like, we're back in Montana. I'm like, okay, so it's just this very different. He had his suit for Johns Hopkins, and then he had his hunting clothes. And it was just, I saw how both my grandmother and my father really struggled with university, yet here we are in the woods doing ceremony. Like it was just very, at the time so AICH kind of like helped me to see like urban native, I could have roots in culture and still be part of the Western world and sort of see how they work. But what became challenging for me, and I felt here I am working in different global indigenous methods, working in Mass General Hospital, working in St. Elizabeth Hospital, working in hospice, working in, different settings. And I thought, at first I was nervous, and I was encouraged by others like, no, you're fine, it'll be fine. And so I was because I speak both in the scientific medical language as well as other language. I thought, well, this is great. I'm at the table and I'm being taken seriously. This is great. But what happened is that even if, for example, I take a patient, client, a patient, and we're both working, and, I'm like, this person was, let's say, in a coma and for 10 minutes didn't breathe, and now they're breathing and they don't have brain damage. And I'm like, do you want to know what I did so that the person doesn't have brain damage? No, Bridget, just go in and do your magic. And that's when it started to get upsetting, because I was like, this isn't magic. This is based in, look, I can even translate this through the lens of physics to tell you what I'm doing. And that became a real source of frustration, isolation, and feeling like I was masking. And I didn't want to do what I saw my grandmother and my father had to do. So I ended up writing about my experiences. Hence, I'm now editing my 5th book. And that's become a way for me to begin to have a forum, a voice, and to begin to work with professors or author, other people in the field, whatever field, whether it's medicine or science, to say, okay, I can read Bridget's work, then I can ask her questions, and we can. So I think a trouble for me in my work has been how to take 2 very different ideologies, two very different tenets of being, and bringing them to somehow where I fit and finding a voice. And that's been a constant theme and challenge that I'm still working with. But for me, I approach that journey and that challenge by actually writing and creating my own voice, my own path, and beginning now to finally see a niche and a community coming from that. So that's been helpful.
Before I turn it back over to Kyle, something you said just made me think of one of your answers to an earlier statement about how you're leading yourself and you're your own North Star. And it sort of feels like in this role that you're doing that as well.
It does, and until he brought up that story, I hadn't really thought of it in that way at all. So, stuff that it was brought to me when I was 19 years old, here I am at 49 going, oh yeah, 30 years later, that's what that might have meant. Oh, I see. I knew there was a reason I'm here today. So I mean, I like to think of it from a physics lens, as well as a traditional lens. I try to do both. It sort of is comforting to me. But I do think that as we align ourselves more, the heart is, stronger than the brain. And we want to get into numbers. It's like 1,000 times stronger electrically than the brain. And so aligning with that heart in the center, it like pulls the needle out of the haystack of what we need as we move forward, instead of having to dig through the haystack with our mind, trying to figure it out. But yeah, I think that I'm having to continually reevaluate, and elders always sort of pop up. It seems to be every 7 years, 5 to 7 years, I get a major shift in where I'm going or push. And I'm always surprised by it because there have been little markers along the way. I'm always sort of the last to know exactly what I'm up to, but definitely there's communities around me that do that seem.
Awesome. Kyle, I did want to give you a chance as well to respond if there was a story or a time you could share about sharing your own story as a way to overcome a professional challenge.
So before working with Maricopa, working with this accounting firm, I was often kind of tokenized in a way where it's like, hey, we're going to meet with natives, you should come with us. And I was just thinking like, well, what tribe are they? Where are they from? They're like, I don't know, they're native. And so, dealing with that within a professional environment, very business structure type A, it allowed me a unique opportunity to be at that place, but also be confident enough to make my stance known of just saying, we can't treat everybody like everybody is a melting pot. When you think about Indigenous nations, we are mosaic, we're each our own, we're each unique, we're not all the same as they can. So we should start there first. Secondly, we should honor the land in which we're on and work with the neighboring tribes first, and then build out scaffold out of that. And so having that conversation was extremely, extremely nerve-wracking for me, because I think I was probably 25 at that time. And just to be able to have that conversation, right? Before even diversity, equity, and inclusion was an actual big thing, to be the only Native American, it was tough. But what I learned from that was that if I didn't speak up, they would continue that practice. But after I had that conversation, then they were relying on me for feedback. Well, we want to explore this, but can we get your feedback first? We want to do this, but can we explore that too? And so, I think that could have been huge. That could have been devastating if I just kind of fell in line and just dropped my head, slumped my shoulders, and did what they said. But instead, I realized that there was a need for cultural competency there. I knew that, we can't continue to do this, and you shouldn't continue to do this. And so that's what I did. And so learning how to find my voice within that context as a professional really, really, really helped me out. And so I often reflect on that.
Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, from my perspective, it certainly sounds like you found a little bit of a better path from an accounting firm to the Storytelling Institute at South Mountain.
Yes.
Certainly plays to your strengths. So I did want to talk a little bit about the educational experience. We're all at institutions of higher education, and the work I do personally focuses on creating communities of students. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And Bridget, you've been really transparent about talking about how your experiences at the American Indian House. I hope I didn't get the name wrong. I probably did, and so I apologize.
It's okay. It's American Indian Community House.
American Indian Community House.
Or AICH. Yeah, there's a bunch of them throughout the nation, but this was the New York City branch at the time. I don't know where it's at right now. It ebbs and flows in size, but yeah.
Thank you. Just wondering about if you could expand a little bit more about how you felt a sense of belonging to an institution of higher education, like how you felt that you belonged there and how you knew that and how it was expressed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I felt very lost at New York University in such a big setting. I wanted to try a bigger setting because I had grown up for high school next to Dartmouth College. So Dartmouth has a very smaller Ivy kind of campus, and their high school right next to it only 100 people in my graduating class. So, I went from that to NYU, and it was overwhelming. So AICH really helped to ground that experience for me. But as far as continuing with my education, because I did go back as I became more involved with the sciences, I did go back for an associate's in STEM at the Community College of Vermont, and then going to APUS for my master's. And what I have found for me that works best is I really love the community college environment. I love it. And I know that APUS isn't a community college, but if I could do everything at a community college, I would. I just feel like, and that's just my personal preference, I like the smaller class size. I like that it's multi-generational, multi-work. I like that the professors and teachers not only have really interesting education and backgrounds, they might be subject matter experts. Like my teachers at APUS are still, they're 30 years at NASA, they're doing really interesting projects, and they're teaching a class or two. Or these classes are crafted from some of the most awesome individuals that may not be the teacher of it, but they crafted it. So I found for me, and I find for me, I almost feel guilty. I do think there's a sense of, I can speak for myself and other Native Indigenous people, of imposter syndrome, of always looking behind me. Is someone going to say, do I fit here? Am I smart enough? Even though I have like a ridiculous grade average, I still worry all the time. And I think that is that comes from hereditary, almost, of just not feeling like, where do I fit, and will something bad happen to me or my family? So in a community college environment where the administration often seems happier, the professors seem happier, there's smaller class sizes, I just see the difference between, I work in part with University of Vermont and the University of Vermont Medical Center. And from what I've seen behind the scenes, it just doesn't seem health inducing. We'll leave it at that. Physical, emotional, mental, and energetic health does not seem to be happening for those professors, nurses, and doctors that work there. So I already sort of have my eye on a place I'd like to do my PhD. And again, it will be a smaller format. I'm thinking about doing another associate's in physics, but just to get the 6 hard physics course. And I'll be going most likely to a small community college to do that. So, I mean, I feel almost embarrassed, ashamed. I don't know what the right word is, that I just don't feel comfortable in large universities. I just can't get around it from what I've seen. And I think that I go a lot more with what is not being said, the feeling, little things I pick up on, than sometimes that magnetic party line that's given out by major universities. I think that when I see a school is aligned with their administration organization, helping and supporting their professors, teachers, aides, all administration at every level, the janitors, the cleaners, everyone is being supported, that translates into a better, healthier environment for the student to really thrive. And I'll just say one last thing, that even with my only year education so far in my master's in space studies and astronomy, I was able to go to like one of the most first of all, I got in to a fellowship. 1,000 people apply. There were 27 of us that got chosen to do this. And I could speak right up there with those at Virginia Tech, Princeton, Harvard, MIT. I was right in there with them. And I think I had that experience because I had such great access to my teachers, who there's only 10 or 15 people in a class. And I get the behind the stories and what's happening at NASA, or I can try out this. And I'm writing like tons of research papers everywhere. And I'm getting a lot of feedback. And that experience allowed me to then on a national and international stage, speak eloquently and knowledgeably on topics that I wonder if some of these other undergraduates in these larger schools are actually getting that same experience of really understanding the material at a really working person, not just like, I don't know how to describe it. I hope that helps, but that's been my journey with my excitement about my education at this point. There we go.
Absolutely. Again, before I turn it back over to Kyle, one of the things you said sparked something in me in terms of fit and finding the right fit at an institution. I am
not to be persuaded by like the fancy whatever, the messaging, the billboard, like I don't know, like it does not translate. At least it didn't for me.
I have a professional history of working at small liberal arts colleges, just because that's where my fit seemed to be. And when I came to APUS, one of the things that struck me is that it's by absolutely all standards, it's a large school, but it still had that small campus feel for me. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to come. But Kyle, I also want to make sure I give time for you.
No problem. So for me, it was, so I started at South Mountain and never looked back after that, like just phenomenal. And so a few of the factors that went into that was first and foremost, just being an adult learner, right? So I was in my early 20s by the time I got out of the military. And a lot of my friends, a lot of people I served with were going directly into universities, about my age, a little bit older, but a lot of them were just giving me negative feedback. Like, I just go to school with kids all day, they like to do this, they like to do that. And so there was that disconnect. But when I got to South, like nobody was like that. They were very much embracing that. They had this huge wraparound approach to not only adult learners, but first generation, right? Because I had no idea what I was doing, no idea how to navigate. And they were there every step of the way. The other thing that I did also was, looking in to see where I could fit, right? And I can explore and kind of build my academic resume. So I was very active with our Native American club, very active with our Veterans Club. And I think those really played a huge factor into really, really honing and focusing on what community is. Because once I really understood community college as a student, I understood that this is here for the community. Like everybody in this classroom is within this geographical area, right? And so that to me was just so reassuring. It was amazing because I knew, hey, there's people right down the street who are going through the same struggles with their math as I am, so on and so forth. And when I transitioned to the university, it was hard. It was hard for me in the sense of where, it's just so big because, again, class sizes play the huge factor. I didn't have just one point of contact. I had a number to call. I had to email somebody, all just for a simple answer. And so that was difficult. But I'm glad that the community college, like that level, was really truly embracing, and also challenging in a sense of where all of my instructors, I can say confidently, pushed me to be a critical thinker more so. I was just kind of just taking in the right curriculum, like thinking, okay, this is what you do as a student. And they're like, wait, stop. How are you going to use this? Do you understand why you're doing this? Like, to get a degree? Like, no. So underlacing those life lessons, along with that really made the huge impact. And, I'm forever grateful now for my colleagues, and what the work they do in the classroom and the future gens that they help out.
Awesome. Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping because we are almost at time, and I can't believe it because I have a list of 100 other questions I want to ask, and so, but I do want to be respectful of both your times. So I can narrow my list of 100 down to about 2 if you both have time for a couple of additional questions. It may take us over our stopping point of half past the hour, but I wanted to make sure you were both okay to stay.
Oh, yes, good to go.
I'm good.
So the first question, this was actually coming up from one of the participants, just the idea of if there's a story that you have to tell yourself to get through challenges. We've talked a lot about some personal challenges and using your story to help you through. And is there maybe not your own story, but someone else's that you tell yourself in order to get through?
I mean, the thing that comes to mind, and it's not to be, I don't want to be dramatic, but my elders would always say, come back to nature, whether that's go out into the woods and just sit, and also to really look at the stories in nature. And that is how I handled my practice when I work with human tissues and human bodies, and I work with the stories inside of human cells. Not only do I interview and work with the person and the patient, but I also have different techniques with hands-on to go in like a sonar and really work with the stories to help understand what the body is keeping in their body, in the score, the language that the body and tissues are saying. And so I was really stuck in 2018. I lost my third child in utero, and it was devastating. And I would try different therapies, and I now understand I would have done well with something called a death doula, which I did not have the proper support that I needed, both as a human being and as an Indigenous person. But I use the support that I have. But the best support finally came when I talked with my elders on the phone and through email. And they said to me, let's go back to nature again. How long does a fly? First of all, it was the surrounding of all these older women around me, just that full, like, even though they weren't physically with me, that full surrounding, and just feeling, almost just like feeling their skirts moving, like when I was a kid, just feeling, and them just very patiently saying how long, a fruit fly only lives, or a fly only lives for 24 hours. That's their story. That's what it's to be. And I realized that they're explaining it to me in a way that brought it home into nature of what was observable and true in nature, brought great ease to my heart and my soul, because I had a vision, and a more Western modern vision of, well, this is her life. She will be conceived and she will live to be 100. Okay, that's what's going to happen. And I had a big book ready to write all the things in that were going to happen. And they tried to show me she still has that book. This is her story. Your experiences with her are still valid. She still had a life. And that was the looping in my brain that I needed to begin the true healing I needed, that I had to let go of what my perceived notion and what nature wanted to do. So those stories of how when I'm really struggling going into the woods, it's why I prefer to live, whether it's in Montana or Oklahoma, New Mexico, or in Vermont, I prefer to live someplace where I can be out in nature, because just taking a walk or just sitting in the woods and breathing will or just sitting with a tree or a plant, pretty much bring me home in a way that my brain might be tangling things up. And, that story is the one that comes the quickest to mind of being very effective, of coming back to what is happening in the natural world and not what is in our modern, or what the stories we tell ourselves that sometimes are not the healthiest. Nature will usually tell a more healthy version of that story.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm so sorry for your loss.
Oh, thank you. It happened, I still am working through it, but I think it's okay. I think another thing, that life and death are the same coin. And I've worked a lot in hospice care at this point as well. And I feel very fortunate to have both worked with mommy baby units and working with new life coming in, and in palliative care and hospice units with life leaving. They're both very sacred times, and to be part of someone's journey on that is just amazing. I would prefer not to be the patient in this situation, but I can use the art of grief and those skills that I learned from elders. I can apply it to me as a natural part of life. And I do get concerned sometimes that people say, oh, this is human condition, or this is just how things are. And I'm like, no, I think that Indigenous cultures throughout time have had a more, a way of working with grief, a way of working with trauma, a way of working with pain that is more healthy to continue, so it doesn't lodge in the body and create disease within the self, the family, or the community unit. It had to figure it out, or we wouldn't be here. Tribes wouldn't have survived if we didn't know how to nourish and nurture ourselves and heal ourselves. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Pat?
Wow. That was amazing, Bridget. I don't know how to follow up on that.
Oh. Well, I had to with your North Star, and I got to bring some.
You did amazing. You did amazing. So when it comes to, I guess, stories, for, I guess, in a way, I would say that enable a sense of resiliency. And I always have to go back to my cultural stories. And so one thing I go back to all the time is we have these two warrior twins. Essentially, they're demigods. And one's name is Nayet Nezyana, which is the monster slayer. And another one name is Twabaschine, which is born for the water. And so all of our, I would say about 80% of our songs, stories, and prayers are about those boys' journeys to find their dad and then come back and then slay all the monsters of the world. But there's a little caveat in there that they did not get rid of every monster. There's still remnants of them today. And the layering on top of that is the sense of what we call in Navajo is Hajon. And so Hajon is really our foundation, our staple, because it is the understanding of positive and negative energy. It's not good and bad. It's not good and evil, right? It's just positive and negative. And so every day we wake up, we need to strive to meet that balance. And so in hearing those stories and understanding them and understanding all the things they've done to get us to where we are today, they still left some monsters for us to fight. And so when I go through hard times or I have hardship, I kind of reflect on that and identify that as a monster that needs to be slain, right? Or one that needs to be addressed. And so I really rely on those in a sense of kind of having that resiliency built up, right? Like somebody else has done this before, they've accomplished this, I can do this. And then more so, I think, is my grandfather. My grandfather was a huge father figure, like a cornerstone in my life. And a few years ago, he was in hospice. And, that's good you brought that up, Bridget. And at that time, that to me was my absolute time to ask every question I never asked, to record every story that I wanted to hear. And I did that for about 3 months. went up. He was in Flagstaff at the time. So I go up every weekend, stay Saturday and Sunday with him and just take in all the information. And the beauty of it is that like he just had like 2, maybe 3 guiding lights, right? First and foremost, his family. Next was hard work. And the last thing was culture. And like, that's what he based everything on. And that's just what he did. Foresight of always the family there. You know, I'm the same way, very family oriented. And so just taking those different piecings of the culture and then also the family stories, like both of those coupled together are really what are my guiding lights right now.
Okay, thank you both so much. I think that we are sort of coming to time and the end of our time together. And so I first want to thank everyone for being here, but specifically I want to thank Kyle and Bridget for participating and sharing and being so candid and open and honest, and you know, being vulnerable at times, and then also sharing their stories. I feel like, you know, going off on this theme of somebody needs to hear your story in order to finish their own, the words of wisdom and the insight that you both have shared with us today have made this such a valuable experience, both for me personally, but I think I'm pretty sure I'm speaking for everybody when I say that. So I want to thank you both so much for being here and for being a part of this. As we are wrapping up, a few things, a few, I guess, final housekeeping notes I wanted to share. First of all, if you have a suggestion or a topic that you'd like to see one of these future panels address, please reach out to the email addresses or phone numbers on the screen that you see. Specifically, if you are an APUS or Rio Salado student, I want to bring your attention to the link at the bottom of the page, the apusformstack.com. I encourage you to share your story with us. So if you complete that form, we may be able to feature you in a future panel. And so if you've got a story to tell, I want to hear it. So please reach out to me and let me know. I think that is everything we have today. Please email address that you registered for this for additional information, hopefully some follow-ups with Bridget and Kyle, and for future panels.